Dust covered the broken coastal road in northern France during the summer of 1944. A United States Army Transportation Corps convoy advanced slowly through shattered stone that once formed a farmhouse wall. Private Samuel Hayes drove the lead truck. He steered around jagged debris while distant shell bursts shook loose more fragments. Every ruined home felt like a warning. War had turned ordinary family walls into silent traps, waiting to claim another life. Hayes stopped when he saw a thin hand pushing through a pile of bricks. He jumped from the truck and heard faint breaths under the rubble. The shape was small, a teenager or younger. The escort guard shouted for him to move on. They feared ambushes along the ruined road. Hayes ignored them. War lead. Payne did not. He refused to leave a living person buried under stone. He brushed aside broken planks and exposed the face of a young German messenger girl. She wore a canvas satchel marked with a faded courier stamp. Blood streaked her cheek. Her eyes opened briefly. She whispered for water in a shaking voice. She was not the enemy. Hunger and rubble were. Hayes lifted stones carefully as her breathing weakened. He sensed that she had only minutes left before the weight crushed her strength entirely. Hayes called 2 soldiers to help lift the larger stones. They hesitated at first. The threat of hidden charges haunted every ruined farm. Hayes checked each board before moving it. The girl winced at every shift in pressure. He spoke calmly to keep her awake. She clutched her satchel even in her weakened state. The convoy commander stepped forward and ordered Hayes to abandon the rescue. Hayes stood firm. Humanity became his only measure. The girl's foot was pinned under a heavy beam. Hayes slid his hands beneath the edge and pushed with all his strength. The weight pressed into his shoulders. Another driver joined him. Together they raised the beam high enough for a guard to pull her clear. Her leg hung limp and bruised. She gasped from pain yet held tight to Hayes's sleeve. For the first time she believed she might survive. Hayes carried her away from the rubble and placed her near the truck. She trembled from shock. A medic checked her pulse and signaled for water. Hayes held a canteen to her lips. She drank in small shaking sips. She thanked him in a faint German whisper. Convoy troops watched quietly. They expected fear or hatred. Instead, they saw a wounded child given a chance to live. The mood shifted like wind across broken stone. The medic cleaned her wounds with trembling speed. The road was exposed to enemy patrols hiding beyond the hedgerows. Hayes watched the tree line while the girl clung to the medic's sleeve. Her breath rasped against the dust. The convoy commander repeated his order. They needed to move before the next artillery strike. Hayes argued that leaving her behind meant certain death. A debate formed in the ruined road while danger gathered unseen. The girl tried to rise but fell forward into Hayes's arms. Her leg failed beneath her. She forced out a few broken words. She had been running a message to a nearby unit when the shell hit the wall. She believed her family had died in a strike 1 week earlier. Her voice cracked from grief. Hayes steadied her and assured her she was safe. His words carried the weight of a promise he refused to break. Hayes insisted she ride with him in the truck cab. The commander hesitated. Regulations forbade transport of enemy civilians without approval. Hayes reminded him of the rubble and the blood. The rule was killing her. The commander agreed under protest. Hayes lifted her gently into the cab and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She leaned against the doorframe with closed eyes. Her breathing slowed into a fragile rhythm. Hayes guided the truck forward while keeping one eye on the hedgerows. The road narrowed into a tight corridor of branches that hid movement on both sides. The girl struggled to stay conscious. Her satchel lay across her lap. Hayes noticed several sealed papers inside. She pressed the bag against her chest, as if it held her last connection to a lost world. He did not ask for its contents. Her survival mattered more than captured documents. A burst of rifle fire cracked from the trees. Hayes accelerated to break the line of sight. Bullets snapped past the truck bed. The girl ducked under the dashboard with a painful cry. Hayes kept the wheel steady and shouted for the convoy to tighten formation. Another burst tore through a wooden crate in the rear vehicle. The escort gunner returned fire toward the shadows. Dust rose behind the convoy like a storm chasing survivors. Hayes reached a bend where the road opened into a small clearing. The gunfire faded as the convoy gained distance. He checked the girl again. Her hands shook, but she breathed steadily. She whispered a question about whether she would live long enough to see calm skies again. Hayes promised he would get her to safety. His voice carried the quiet strength of a man determined to defy both fear and doctrine. The convoy reached a temporary Allied aid station set in the courtyard of a damaged monastery. Medics rushed toward the arriving trucks. Hayes lifted the girl from the cab. She winced from the movement, but held to his sleeve for balance. A nurse guided them toward a makeshift tent lined with lanterns and field stretchers. Other wounded civilians lay along the wall. The air carried the thick smell of disinfectant mixed with burned timber. The nurse examined the girl's leg and shook her head at the deep bruising. The bone held, but the damage was severe. Hayes stayed near her as medics cleaned the cuts on her face. She whispered her name through cracked breath. She was called Lena. The name reached Hayes like a reminder that she had lived a full life before rubble buried her. She asked if she would be moved again. Hayes promised she would stay safe for now. An officer approached Hayes with concern. Transport regulations required documentation for every rescued civilian. Hayes accepted the paperwork but refused to leave Lena's side. The officer noticed the courier satchel and asked for its contents. Lena clutched the strap and shook her head. Hayes stepped between them and argued that she needed rest before any questioning. The officer agreed reluctantly. Hayes saw fear leave her eyes for the first time since the rubble. Night settled over the monastery courtyard. Lanterns cast long shadows across the broken arches. Lena lay on a stretcher inside a narrow tent. Her breaths came slowly, but held steady. Hayes sat beside her with a cup of warm broth. She struggled to lift her hand, so he guided the cup carefully. She drank in small sips. Fear softened in her eyes. She asked if she was still in danger. Hayes assured her she was safe under Allied care. A medic examined her again and checked the swelling in her leg. He warned Hayes that her condition might worsen without steady warmth and rest. The night air carried a chill through the torn canvas walls. Hayes searched the supply crates and found a wool blanket meant for transport crews. He placed it over her carefully. She whispered gratitude. Trauma shock loosened its grip. Humanity became the only thing holding her together. Outside the tent, Hayes faced the officer from earlier. The officer demanded details about her origins and the documents inside the satchel. Hayes argued that she needed rest before any questions. The officer warned that delaying interrogation risked missed intelligence. Hayes held firm. The rule was killing her. The officer finally agreed to wait until morning. Hayes returned to Lena's side and watched her drift into exhausted sleep. Rain fell before dawn. Drops tapped softly on the tent roof. Lena woke with a shiver. Hayes helped her sit upright. She asked again about her family. Her voice carried quiet fear. Hayes explained that many towns had been evacuated. She might still find survivors. The words offered a thin hope, but it was enough to steady her breath. She told Hayes she had tried to run messages to keep her unit from shelling nearby farms. A nurse entered and prepared her for transfer to a safer treatment station. Lena reached for Hayes' hand. She feared being separated. Hayes promised he would escort the transport vehicle himself. The nurse noted the bond forming between rescuer and survivor. Trauma created strange threads between people. Hayes knew kindness had become rebellion. He refused to let bureaucracy pull her away while she still trembled from shock. The convoy reformed in the courtyard. Hayes helped guide Lena onto a stretcher inside a small ambulance truck. Rain darkened the ground beneath the wheels. Soldiers checked weapons and scanned for movement beyond the monastery wall. Hayes climbed into the passenger seat and kept Lena within view. She held her satchel even tighter. Her grip showed that she carried more than messages. She carried the weight of a world collapsing around her. The ambulance moved slowly along a muddy road, lined with broken trees. Hayes watched the tree line. Lena lay on a stretcher behind him with her satchel beside her. Her eyes stayed half open. Every jolt from the uneven road made her wince. Hayes tried to distract her by asking about her home. She described a small village with a bakery that filled the street with warm bread each morning. The memory steadied her breath. A sharp explosion erupted ahead. The ambulance halted. A shell crater blocked the path. Smoke drifted across the road. Hayes stepped out and checked the surroundings. The driver shouted that enemy patrols might follow the shell. The wounded inside the ambulance stirred in fear. Hayes returned to Lena and told her to stay low. She nodded weakly. Her trust in him had become her anchor against terror. The escort soldiers cleared debris from the crater's edge and signaled for the convoy to move. Hayes helped the medic reposition Lena to reduce pressure on her injured leg. She whispered that she was scared. Hayes told her fear meant she was still alive. She held his hand with fragile strength. The ambulance continued forward. Mud splashed against the metal frame as the wounded girl fought to hold on to hope. The convoy reached a larger field hospital built near a captured crossroads. Rows of white tents filled the open meadow. Hayes climbed out and signaled for help. Dotto. Lena was lifted gently from the ambulance and carried toward a treatment tent. Her face tightened from pain. The nurse reassured her. The tent glowed with warm yellow light. The steady rhythm of generators filled the air like a heartbeat guiding survivors through the chaos. Doctors examined Lena's injuries in detail. They confirmed her leg would heal with rest and proper care. Hayes waited at the tent entrance. Mud covered his uniform. He watched her as she answered the doctor's questions in a soft voice. She hid the satchel beneath the blanket. Hayes understood she feared losing the last piece of her old life. A doctor noticed her trembling and asked Hayes to stay inside for support. He sat beside her as a medic cleaned her wounds more thoroughly. Lena whispered that she once thought enemy soldiers would never show kindness. Hayes told her that every life deserved protection. The medic wrapped her leg with fresh bandages. Lena looked stronger than before. Relief passed across her face. The weight of the rubble no longer held her down. She could finally breathe with something close to hope. Word spread through the field hospital about Hayes's rescue. Some soldiers praised his courage. Others doubted his judgment. Hayes ignored the division. Lena needed rest. She lay on a clean cot inside a quieter tent. The rain eased outside. Light filtered through the canvas in soft, muted tones. Hayes brought her warm broth again. She sipped slowly. Her hands steadied. The nurse remarked on her improvement. Humanity had given her a second chance. A senior officer arrived to review her case. He asked Hayes why he risked the convoy to save an enemy messenger. Hayes explained that Rubble did not choose sides. He repeated that she was a civilian caught in the crossfire. The officer studied Lena's pale face and nodded. He approved her, continued Kay. He also ordered that her satchel remain untouched until she consented. Lena released a relieved breath. Hayes stepped outside for fresh air. The meadow stretched toward distant hills marked by smoke trails from earlier fighting. Despite the scars of war, the field felt calmer than any place he had seen in weeks. Lena called faintly for him. Hayes returned to the tent. She asked if he would stay a while longer. Hayes pulled up a stool and sat beside her. Trust formed quietly in the space between survivor and rescuer. The field hospital quieted as evening descended over the meadow. Lena rested on a clean cot near the far wall. Hayes remained close, checking her breathing as soft light passed through heavy canvas seams. The sounds of distant artillery faded into low echoes. She reached for her satchel again. It had become a lifeline. Hayes assured her she could keep it until she felt strong enough to speak about its contents. The nurse entered with a clipboard and asked Hayes to step outside. Lena's eyes widened with fear. Hayes promised he would not go far. The nurse checked her pulse and replaced bandages with smooth precision. Lena whispered, asking whether Hayes would return. Her voice trembled with exhaustion and trust. The nurse smiled and said he had been there since she arrived. Comfort settled over her like a thin blanket. Outside the tent, Hayes confronted another supply officer asking why he protected an enemy courier. Hayes explained that she was a civilian crushed under rubble. The officer noted her satchel and hinted at sensitive documents. Hayes repeated that survival mattered more than papers. His voice carried steady firmness. After a long pause, the officer agreed to delay interrogation. Hayes returned to the tent and saw relief spread across Lena's face. Hayes carried a small tin bowl of stew back to the tent. Lena tried to sit up when she saw him. He guided her gently and fed her slow spoonfuls. Warmth returned to her cheeks. She whispered that she had been running messages to prevent shelling on nearby farms. Her voice broke at the memory. Hayes listened without judgment. She feared the Allies would punish her. Hayes promised she was safe. After eating, Lena opened the satchel slightly. She revealed torn maps and scribbled notes from her destroyed village. Nothing military remained inside. Just fragments of a life she had failed to protect. Hayes understood why she guarded it so tightly. She asked if she could keep it with her during the journey. Hayes nodded with quiet certainty. The satchel represented her past, not enemy intelligence. A sudden commotion erupted outside. A group of wounded soldiers arrived from the front. Medics shouted for space. Hayes helped move supplies while Lena watched with worried eyes. The chaos pushed her deeper into her blanket. She called Hayes' name. He returned quickly and reassured her. The medical tent rocked under heavy footsteps. Yet the moment he took her hand, the noise fell away. Safety became a presence, not a place. Later that night, Hayes escorted Lena outside so she could breathe fresh air. She leaned on his arm as they walked a few steps from the tent. Moonlight revealed rows of white canvas tents stretching across the meadow. Lena whispered that it felt unreal to stand freely after believing she would die below the rubble. Hayes told her the worst had passed. Her eyes glistened with gratitude. A medic approached and advised Hayes to let her rest again. Lena hesitated. She asked if she could stay a little longer. The medic agreed but warned against strain. Lena watched the distant hills, recalling the farm she once delivered messages to. She wondered if anyone survived. Hayes did not speak. His silence held more comfort than any promise he could make. As they returned toward the tent, a flare illuminated the horizon. The glow unsettled Lena. She clutched Hayes' sleeve tightly. Hayes reassured her that the front line had shifted far from the hospital. She took a deep breath and released his arms slowly. Her steps grew steadier. She no longer moved like someone expecting the earth to collapse beneath her. Recovery began with small moments of courage. The next morning, Hayes helped Lena learn to stand on her injured leg. She winced, but refused to give up. The nurse offered a wooden crutch. Lena accepted it with determination. Hayes guided her step by step around the tent. Her balance wavered. Each movement felt like reclaiming part of her life. Hayes encouraged her with steady patience. She whispered that she wanted to walk again without fear. Later, Lena rested while Hayes spoke with the senior officer. The officer admitted that keeping her safe was the right choice. He confirmed that her satchel held nothing of strategic value. Lena overheard and sighed with relief. Hayes returned and told her she was free from suspicion. Her eyes welled with quiet emotion. She thanked him for protecting her when others doubted her innocence. That afternoon, a Red Cross volunteer brought warm clothing for Lena. She touched the soft fabric with disbelief. Hayes helped her put on the coat. It fit loosely around her thin frame. She smiled for the first time since her rescue. Hayes felt the moment settle into memory. War stole much from her, but dignity could still be restored. Hope survived in gestures no larger than kindness. Lena practiced walking outside the tent, each step slow but determined. Hayes accompanied her, matching her pace. The morning breeze brushed across the meadow. Other soldiers paused to watch. They had seen her arrive broken and silent. Now she moved forward with a fragile but growing confidence. Hayes noticed the strength returning to her voice as she spoke more about her family and hopes. During a brief rest, Lena asked why Hayes risked punishment to save her. He told her that Rubble did not choose sides and no one deserved to die buried and alone. She listened with deep emotion. Her grip tightened on the crutch as she whispered a quiet thank you. Hayes felt the sincerity in her tone. She was not just healing physically. She was reclaiming the ability to trust. In the afternoon, a medical truck prepared to move patients to a safer rear position. Lena was cleared for transfer. Hayes promised to ride in the same vehicle. She nodded with visible relief. As orderlies loaded supplies, Lena stood beside him, leaning lightly on her crutch. For the first time, she looked beyond the war-torn horizon without fear. The road ahead no longer felt like a threat. The medical truck rumbled across the countryside toward the rear sectors. Lena sat beside Hayes with her crutch resting against the door frame. The field stretched golden under the late afternoon sun. Dido. She leaned gently on his arm when the truck hit rough patches. The road no longer frightened her. Hayes watched her regain strength with each passing mile. The silence between them held a rare calm, born from survival. At a checkpoint, military police inspected the vehicle. They glanced at Lena with guarded curiosity. Hayes explained she was a rescued civilian under medical transfer orders. The sergeant nodded and waved them through. Lena exhaled with relief. She had feared interrogation. Yet no one questioned her further. Confidence replaced fear as she realized she was no longer viewed as an enemy, but as a life worth protecting. As night settled, the convoy reached a larger treatment camp near a forest clearing. Lanterns lit long paths between medical tents. Hayes helped Lena down from the truck. She leaned on her crutch with balanced steps. Her progress surprised several medics. One of them commented on her resilience. Lena lowered her head shyly. Hayes felt quiet pride. She had come far from the rubble that nearly killed her. Lena settled into her new tent shared with other civilians. Hayes arrived soon after and asked how she felt. Her answer, carried quiet determination. She said the pain eased each hour. Hayes watched her sip warm soup with careful control. The forest wind brushed the canvas. For the first time in days, Lena seemed calm. She held her satchel close in steady reassurance. Outside the tent, a chaplain led a gentle service for wounded soldiers. The soft voices drifted through the camp. Lena listened from her cot. The rhythm reminded her of distant village mornings. She closed her eyes and let the sound settle her thoughts. Hayes remained near her without speaking. His presence made the tent feel less fragile. She breathed with measured calm. Later, the doctor inspected her leg. He encouraged her to walk again. Lena stood with her crutch. Hayes watched every movement. She took careful steps until her foot found a steady pattern. The doctor praised her balance. Hayes clapped lightly with pride. Lena lowered her eyes with shy gratitude. Progress felt tangible. She believed she could recover fully with steady effort. Morning light filtered through the tall trees of the forest clearing. Hayes found Lena sitting outside her tent with her crutch resting across her knees. She smiled as he approached. They walked slowly along the tree line. Dew shimmered across the grass. Each careful step felt like progress. Lena inhaled crisp air with renewed strength. Hayes steadied her when she stumbled slightly. They passed soldiers repairing equipment near a supply rack. Metal tools clinked as they worked. Several soldiers nodded at Hayes. Some looked at Lena with respectful curiosity. Her posture carried new confidence. Hayes asked what she wanted once the war ended. Lena said she wished to return to her village and rebuild whatever remained. Hayes understood that rebuilding required courage. A tractor clearing rubble near the storage tent caught Lena's attention. The harsh noise made her pause. Her hands trembled briefly. Hayes stepped closer without touching her. She steadied her breath and looked directly at the debris piles. She said she wanted to face her fear instead of avoiding it. Hayes admired her resolve. Strength could grow even in painful memories. More wounded civilians arrived as the day progressed. Lena listened to their stories with quiet empathy. They recognized strength in her calm tone. She understood the hidden fear in their voices. Sharing her own experience helped them settle. Hayes watched from a short distance. He saw her shifting from survivor to supporter. Her presence gave the tent a warmer atmosphere. While Hayes moved equipment with a radio operator, Lena practiced walking again. She no longer hesitated at each step. Determination shaped her movements. When Hayes returned, she showed him the distance she had covered. His smile came without hesitation. Her progress exceeded all expectations. Lena felt confidence returning. She believed she could rebuild her future. Evening fog drifted through the forest clearing. Lanterns glowed softly along the camp paths. Lena and Hayes sat outside the tent without speaking for a long moment. She whispered that survival gave her a responsibility to choose kindness instead of fear. Hayes answered that courage grew strongest after hardship. Fog muffled the camp into a gentle hush. Their silhouettes rested inside the quiet. A senior doctor visited early to evaluate Lena's progress. She stood with her crutch and lifted one hand briefly to show improved balance. The doctor nodded with approval. Hayes observed with quiet pride. The doctor authorized her transfer to a long-term recovery center. Lena felt pride mixed with uncertainty. Her future no longer felt distant or impossible. Lena gathered her belongings and held her satchel against her chest. The faded emblem carried memories she refused to abandon. Hayes held the tent flap open as she stepped into the bright camp. Soldiers preparing the transport smiled at her in passing. She walked with a new steadiness. Each step felt like a beginning rather than a struggle. Before boarding the truck, Lena turned to Hayes with soft gratitude. She said she survived because he refused to ignore her suffering. Hayes told her she survived because she fought to stay alive. Lena lowered her gaze with humility. She climbed aboard while Hayes secured crates behind her. When the engine rumbled, she looked toward the open road with steady hope.